Captain Elias Kane had always considered himself a man who lived by principles practical ones, forged in the harsh void between stars. A lifetime as a free trader had taught him to be cautious, calculating, and self-reliant. But beneath that hardened exterior was something rarer among spacers, a stubborn thread of empathy. That, more than anything, was what made the scene on Vero's rust-colored docking bay so infuriating. The deal was supposed to be simple. The Vyrathi colonies had been ravaged by famine and disease after the Dravari raids, and Elias's ship, the Wayfarer, carried badly needed medical rations. In exchange, he was promised a crate of hypercrystals rare, shimmering energy sources worth a fortune back in human space. He risked pirate attacks, navigated collapsing wormholes, and dodged Dravari patrols to get here. He expected gratitude, maybe relief. Instead, the Vyrathi merchant brought him. She was striking in a way that felt almost unreal: skin, a luminous shade of violet eyes, a metallic silver that caught the light like mirrors, and long hair braided with strands of dull gemstones. But she was shackled. Chains clinked around her wrists and ankles, heavy enough to chafe her skin. She stood tall despite them, chin lifted in silent defiance as the merchant presented her with a bow. "This is your payment," the merchant announced, voice rough like gravel. "She is of no use here. Excess property of the fallen House Esserin. She belongs to you now." The words made Ilias's stomach twist. He had seen some ugly things in his travels: mercenary raids, famine worlds, slavers on the outer rim, but being offered a sentient person as payment still hit like a punch to the gut. "I didn't come here to buy a person," he said. Keeping his voice calm but hard, the merchant only smiled thinly. "You misunderstand. It is not a purchase. It is a gift, a gesture of honor. To refuse would dishonor us." Ilias's jaw tightened. He knew enough about Vyrathi culture to understand the trap being laid. Publicly rejecting a gift would be an insult. Insulting them could turn the entire crowd of armed dockworkers who were now watching the exchange closely against him. On this battered world, surrounded by strangers, that could mean death before he even launched. The girl had remained silent until then. But as the merchant pressed her forward, she stumbled slightly and immediately recovered, standing tall again. Her silver eyes locked with Ilias's. There was no fear in them, only cold fire, like someone who had endured too much to be afraid anymore. "If you refuse," the merchant hissed softly, "you will shame us. Shame means blood. Best you simply take her and leave." Ilias stood very still. He hated being cornered, hated the way everyone was waiting to see if the human would provoke them. He glanced at the girl again. Something about her posture. Her expression was wrong for someone who had supposedly been broken into servitude. She looked like a coiled spring. Finally, he exhaled through his nose. "Fine, I'll take her." The tension in the air broke like glass. The merchant's smile widened, and he bowed again, this time lower. "Honor is preserved," he said, and left with surprising speed. The onlookers dispersed. Elias and the girl were alone. Elias reached to the control panel near the bay doors and tapped in a command. The magnetic locks on her chains released with a sharp hiss. The heavy shackles slid off her wrists and clattered loudly to the deck plates. "You're free now," he said. His tone was firm but not unkind. She didn't move at first, just stared at him, silver eyes unblinking. Then, in a voice that was low but carried steel, she said, "You are a fool, human. You have no idea what you have just accepted." There was no gratitude in her tone, no relief, only warning. The ship Wayfarer had always been quiet. Elias Kane had designed his life that way: no crew, no passengers, no responsibilities beyond his own heartbeat and the ship's engines. But now, there was someone else on board. "Sir." She had said her name with the detached precision of someone reciting a duty, not sharing an identity. After Elias freed her from the shackles, she followed him aboard without a word, like a shadow that had simply chosen to move. Now she lingered in the far corners of the corridors, her violet skin catching the dim light, her silver eyes constantly scanning as if expecting an ambush at any moment. From the beginning, she resisted everything he tried to offer. Here, Elias said on the first day, handing her a clean ship suit. "It'll be more comfortable then? Whatever those rags are." She took one glance at the fabric and set it aside without speaking. He tried again, with food, real food, not ration packs. She barely touched it. She only drank water sparingly, as if rationing even that. She accepted the small cabin he offered but never slept there, preferring instead to curl silently in a corner of the cargo bay. It was as though she didn't trust walls. Elias found it unsettling in the solitude of hyperspace. With stars streaking past the viewport in endless silence, even a single extra presence felt loud. He was used to the rhythm of the engines, the sigh of the air recyclers, the click of his boots on metal. Now he also heard the whisper of her steps, soft, careful, almost predatory. It made him wonder what kind of life had shaped her. One evening, as they cruised through the black gulfs between star lanes, he tried again to reach her. He found her sitting cross-legged on the cargo bay deck, staring at nothing. "Do you want me to drop you somewhere safe?" he asked gently. Her gaze lifted slowly to meet his. Her eyes were like cold silver moons, unyielding. "There is no such place for me," she said, voice low and calm. "They would find me." "Kill me who?" Elias asked, leaning on a railing. She said nothing, just returned her stare to the floor. Elias bit back his frustration. She wasn't hostile, at least, not openly, but she was locked inside herself like a fortress. And despite every instinct telling him to leave her at the nearest port, he couldn't bring himself to abandon her. Something in her silence didn't feel like pride. It felt like pain. That night, unable to sleep, Elias wandered the ship's corridors. Passing the cargo bay, he paused when he heard something unusual. A voice. Her voice. She was whispering in a language he didn't know. Her tone rhythmic, almost melodic, like a chant. Faint silver light shimmered under her skin as she spoke, rippling gently across her arms and throat like moonlight on water. Elias froze in the shadows, watching. It wasn't technology, it was something coming from her. Then she stopped. Slowly, her head turned toward him. "Eavesdropping is dangerous," she said without rising, her tone soft but edged. "Especially when you do not know what you listen to." Elias stepped forward, not backing down. "I'm starting to think you're not just some abandoned property." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Property? No. Once I was called your radiance. Now I am hunted. And you, human, have just made yourself their next target." Her words sent a chill through him. It wasn't a boast, it was a warning. She spoke like someone who knew armies were moving in the dark, and that their eyes would soon turn toward him simply for standing near her. She lay back down afterward, closing her eyes as though dismissing him. But Elias couldn't shake what he had seen or the feeling that the air itself seemed to hum faintly around her, like the ship recognized her presence as he returned to his cabin. Elias realized he had taken on something far more dangerous than cargo. Saris was not broken, not lost, not defeated. She was hiding. It began as a ripple on the sensor Zane anomaly in the void, a gravitational flicker too precise to be natural. Elias was in the cockpit, feet propped on the console, skimming charts for unregistered trade lanes, when alarms blared and the proximity scanner screamed red. A massive warship decloaked directly ahead of Wayfarer, its black hull jagged and spined like the carapace of some colossal predator. Its markings were unmistakable. Elias's the Dravari Imperium. Ilias's blood ran cold. The Dravari were infamous across half the galaxy, merciless, methodical conquerors who left nothing but ash in their wake. He had seen the aftermath of their raids before. Cities turned to glass, colonies left silent but for the wind. His little freighter couldn't hope to survive an encounter with one of their cruisers. Brace for impact. He yelled into the ship's comm system. A split second later, the first volley hit. Missiles screamed out of the void, slamming into Wayfarer's shields. The whole ship shuddered violently, alarms shrieking. Panels flickered. Elias fought to stabilize the ship, hands flying over the controls. "Why are they attacking us?" A voice answered from behind him, calm, level. "Utterly out of place amid the chaos, because they know I am alive." He turned. Cerise stood in the cockpit doorway, her violet skin luminous in the red emergency lights, her expression unreadable. She hadn't even braced against the impact, simply stood with her hands folded behind her back as if the attack were an inconvenience. Ilias's eyes widened. What? She stepped closer, unhurried, despite the ship lurching violently around them. They are Dravari. They hunt what remains of my bloodline. Her words made no sense to him, but they carried a weight. A bone-deep certainty. Then tell me who you are, Elias demanded, wrenching the yoke to dive beneath another barrage. The shields flared white as another missile grazed them. Because unless you give me a reason not to throw you out an airlock to save my own skin, we're going to die in the next 90 seconds. Cerise's silver eyes ignited like molten metal. She stepped to the console, standing tall despite the chaos, spoke as though delivering a decree. I am Cerise Saren, Crown Princess of the 11 Moons, rightful heir to the Sapphire Throne. The Dravari slaughtered my house and burned my world to cinders. They believed me dead. She fixed him with a fierce, burning stare, until you accepted me as your slave. Ilias's jaw slackened. A princess, all this time. She had been royalty-hunted royalty, thought dead. And by taking her aboard, by freeing her, he had just painted a giant target on his own ship. The ship rocked violently as another blast struck the aft shields. Sparks rained from an overhead conduit. This is insane, Elias muttered, slamming his hands on the controls. We're going to die. No, Cerise said. Her voice cut through the alarms like a blade. We are going to fight, before Elias could protest. She placed her hand flat on the main console. A surge of light rippled from her palm, cascading through the ship's systems like living fire. The panels flared with alien glyphs, glowing as if the wayfarer were waking from a long slumber. The engines roared louder, deeper, as if something immense had just stirred inside them. Ilias's eyes darted across the displays. Shield strength climbing. Reactor output spiking beyond safe parameters, but stable. Weapons, which had been little more than token mining lasers, suddenly showed power levels rivaling military cannons. What are you doing? He demanded. Reawakening the ship, Cerise said simply. Your kind build well, but you forget how to sing to your machines. My blood remembers. Another barrage from the Dravari cruisers streaked toward them. But this time, the Wayfarer danced away effortlessly. Engines howling like predators loosed from chains. For the first time since the attack began, Elias felt a spark of hope in something else. A thrill. The stars blurred past as Wayfarer plunged toward the Dravari warship like a sliver of lightning. Elias. Kane had flown hundreds of dangerous runs in his life through asteroid storms, pirate ambushes, collapsing wormholes, but nothing like this. The controls were alive under his hands, thrumming with energy as if the ship had grown a soul. Every movement was sharper, faster, more fluid, like the Wayfarer had been reborn as a predator, and at the heart of it stood Cerise. Her eyes burned molten silver as her hands danced across the console, not touching keys, but weaving patterns in the air. Holographic glyphs bloomed at her gestures. Ancient symbols Elias couldn't read, yet somehow his ship understood. The alien script slid across the displays, fusing with human code as if the two languages were speaking for the first time in centuries. She's listening. Cerise murmured not to him, but to the ship. She remembers the old harmonics. Good, Elias gritted out, yanking the yoke to dive beneath a swarm of incoming plasma bolts. Because if she doesn't, we're dead. The Dravari cruiser loomed ahead, massive, jagged, black as the void. Its cannons spat emerald fire that lit up the dark. One hit would shatter them. Elias knew that. But now they were moving like nothing he had ever flown. Charge the mining lasers, he barked. Cerise didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the ship's core interface, pressing both palms flat to the console. A silver glow surged from her body, pouring through the wires like liquid moonlight. The Wayfarer's dull industrial lasers flared to life, blazing white-hot, their power output climbing until the safety meters screamed red. Ilias's eyebrows shot up. That's impossible. It is royalty, Cerise said, voice sharp as steel. Not impossible, Before he could reply, the Dravari cruiser unleashed another volley. Cerise twisted her fingers in the air. The Wayfarer rolled, spinning between the plasma streams so closely that heat shimmered across the hull plating. The starfield whirled around them like a carousel of fire. Returning. Fire, she said. The lasers fired. They weren't mining beams anymore. They were lances of pure white light that slashed through space like swords. The first shot gouged a burning scar across the Dravar ship's armor. The second sheared a turret clean off. The third punched through a shield generator, sending a ripple of blue fire crackling across the warship's hull. Elias whooped aloud, adrenaline surging. We're actually doing it. Do not celebrate yet, Cerise warned, eyes never leaving the enemy ship. They will call reinforcements. Almost as if to prove her right, his scanners chirped a hyperspace signature blooming on the edge of the system. Another Dravari ship inbound. Of course, Elias muttered. The Dravari cruiser turned broadside, preparing its main plasma lance. The cannon's glow built like a newborn sun. One hit from that would vaporize them. Cerise, Elias said quietly, we need to run. No, she said, voice fierce. If we run, they will hunt. If we end them, they will fear. Her words struck him like a drumbeat. Fear, not survival victory. That was how royalty thought. All right, Elias growled, tightening his grip. Let's make them afraid. Cerise closed her eyes. A deep, resonant hum filled the cockpit, vibrating in Elias's bones. The lights dimmed. Then the Wayfarer roared a sound so primal and powerful it felt alive. The engines flared white. The ship lunged forward with impossible speed. They streaked under the cruiser's belly, just as the plasma lance fired. The beam tore through empty space, where they had been a heartbeat before. The Wayfarer spun and rose behind the cruiser. Lining up perfectly on its exposed rear thrusters, fire, Cerise whispered. Elias slammed the trigger. The supercharged beams carved through the Dravari ship's engines. The massive cruiser convulsed as explosions rippled down its length. Fire bloomed from its hull. Secondary blasts tore through its internal reactors then, with a silent flash, the Dravari warship disintegrated into a cloud of molten debris and dying. Embers silence, only the stars remained. Elias sagged back in his chair, heart pounding like thunder in his ears. He couldn't believe it. They had destroyed a Dravari warship with a freighter. Cerise stood perfectly still, staring at the drifting wreckage with an unreadable expression. Her silver eyes dimmed back to normal, though they still glimmered faintly like distant starlight. You fought well, she said at last. Softly, Elias gave a short laugh. I flew. You turned my ship into a monster. She tilted her head, almost smiling. Almost. Then perhaps we make a good pair, human, for a moment. Their gazes locked hand. Something shifted quietly between them, like the first spark before a fire, but the moment passed. Cerise straightened, regal once more. We must move. The Dravari will not accept this humiliation. They will come in force. Elias nodded grimly, setting a course to jump. They had survived. Kalen could not remember the last time he had stood in the open with a blaster trained on him and felt calm. The twin suns of Ithor burned overhead as the courtyard of the Grand Citadel erupted into chaos. Dozens of armed guards glimmering in polished carapace armor had converged, forming a shifting circle of spears and rifles. At their center stood Kalen, unarmed, dust-covered, and bleeding from a shallow cut across his temple. Beside him stood Lyriel, shoulders straight, eyes flashing with the fierce defiance of someone who had just set fire to the very chains meant to bind her. Seize them both, barked an officer, mandibles clicking, but none moved. Because Lyriel raised her hand, not trembling, not unsure, and said, with a voice that cracked across the courtyard like a whip, I am Lyriel de Vaneth, rightful heir to the throne of 7 moons. I name Kalen Var, protector of my person. And any who strike at him strike at me. The words hit like an orbital bombardment. The guards froze, their loyalty warring with centuries of protocol. Every species present knew what it meant when a royal named a champion. It was ancient law. Older than their treaties, older even than the Empire itself. A champion could not be harmed while the heir lived. Kalen glanced sidelong at her, stunned. That was dramatic, he muttered under his breath. Lyriel smirked faintly, though her hands trembled. You told me to stop acting like a slave, she whispered back. So I won't. The High Chancellor slithered forward then, eyes bulging in outrage. This is treasonous pageantry. You are a runaway. A consort captive, given as payment, nothing more. Lyriel's voice went cold. You sold me like livestock. You hid my lineage. You sought to end my life quietly before the coronation could call me home. And yet here I stand. What does that make you? Her words rippled through the crowd like a blade through silk. Murmurs rose. The truth was out now, bleeding into the air like bright dye in water. Kalen stepped forward, planting himself between Lyriel and the advancing guards. She's telling the truth, he said, his voice carrying more steel than the soldiers' spears. I've seen the data logs, the emblems hidden under her slave tags. You tried to bury her, and you failed. Something shifted then. Some guards lowered their weapons. Others looked away, unwilling to meet Lyriel's gaze. It was enough. The standoff broke when the royal sigil flickered to life on Lyriel's palm, shimmering in gold. It was her final gambit, the air mark encoded into her DNA. It pulsed in the warm sunlight like a heartbeat. Undeniable and ancient silence fell. Then, one by one, the guards dropped to their knees. The High Chancellor shrieked in fury and lunged only for Kalen to intercept him mid-strike. The human moved like lightning, disarming the alien in a blur and planting him face first in the dirt. Gasps swept the courtyard. Lyriel lifted her chin. Take him to the dungeons, she commanded, and they obeyed. In the hours that followed, the citadel thrummed with upheaval. Loyalists flooded to Lyriel's side, pledging themselves anew. Word raced across the empire. The lost princess had returned. Alive and defiant, her human champion at her side. When the tumult finally eased, Kalen found himself alone with her in the throne chamber. The great crystal dais glowed faintly beneath their feet. You've got an empire to run now, he said. Quietly, Lyriel turned to him, her violet eyes softer than he'd ever seen them. And I want you beside me when I do, he blinked. I'm no politician, you're honest, fearless. You saved me when no one else would. She stepped closer. What is a crown without someone I trust to keep me human? Kalen hesitated, then smiled crookedly. All right, Your Highness, but I get to keep my ship. Lyriel laughed a clear, unshackled sound and slipped her hand into his. Deal.